sometimes, it's like, hey, like, this is a shit ton of work that I don't want to do. Can you do it for free? It's like kind of weird, but I don't know. Oh, that's interesting. All right, you ready to knock into this thing, man?
Let's do it.
All right, man. Everybody, welcome back to the Jameson on the Rocks podcast. Today we have Michael with us. What's your last name, Michael?
Thomas.
Michael Thomas, sorry. From Echo Base right here in Athens, Georgia. But you're not from here, I presume, right? Where are you from?
No, I grew up in the provincial part of northern England, Stoke-on-Trent.
Interesting. All right, favorite English band of all time, go.
Oh, no. I mean, I'm a Beatles freak, so it's always going to be the Beatles.
It's got to. Good answer. All right, sweet. Now we're getting warmed up. All right, everybody, welcome back to the show. Excited to have you on, man. It's been a while to set this up. I really appreciate it. Thank y'all for tuning back in. This is episode 120. We've got merch, all that good shit. Subscribe to the show. Y'all go follow Echo Base if you're watching this. And yeah, let's knock into this, man. So, all right, so you born in England?
Yeah, I grew up in Stoke-on-Trent, and I emigrated when I was like 22.
Okay.
Moved to Spain for 3 years.
Wow, okay.
And then I came to school out here in New York. So I was there for 3 years.
What university?
Columbia University.
Oh, wow. Okay, amazing.
That was an experience, but it was also like a look in the whole ivory tower of academia. And I feel like I probably could have got every bit of that education for a little bit less money.
Was it a big culture shock? Because you'd have moved here when you were 22, you said, right?
Yeah, everything about it was a culture shock.
I bet, right?
I mean, obviously, I think anyone moving to New York is going to have a culture shock.
I went to New York for 2 days, and I was like, oh, my God. You know what I mean? It's like crazy.
And the whole U.S. college culture is so different from the U.K. Like, you have Greek life. That's a thing.
Yes.
First, I was like, it's like a cult.
It's
like,
a very culty.
Kind of like a cult, yeah.
Very culty.
Yeah, looks
so
like a cult.
So that's not a thing over the pond? Not really. Maybe it's becoming more, but I feel like in the UK we definitely have people assembling for clubs and things like that, but it's not this like pay to play kind of thing.
Like Animal House kind of thing.
Okay, super huge deal down here. That's crazy. Interesting. All right, so so you're 22. Was that undergrad or were you doing your master's at Columbia?
Undergrad. It took me 10 years to do.
Hell yeah, dude. The victory laps. I love it.
I kind of busted out as much as I could in those 3 years, and I just ran straight out of money. And I took a job in California.
Okay.
And they wouldn't do any remote programming. You had to physically be in New York.
Interesting.
So it wasn't until the pandemic I took the job here in Athens that brought me here in 2020. And finally, Columbia put its programming online. Okay. So I actually walked on Zoom whilst I was at work.
No way. Yeah. That's wild, man. Interesting. All right. So, but your music industry experience before that, when you were in England and stuff, or when did you start getting into music industry in bands? I know you played a band here some. Yeah. Were you always into this sort of thing? Any violin aspirations, or it just kind of happened when you got to the States? Yeah,
it was always the thing that I wanted to do. When I was 16, I was lucky. I was in a great local band.
Awesome.
And we got signed to an independent label.
Let's go. That's sick.
You get the stars in your eyes and that kind of thing. But we did a lot of the big check in the boxes. Like we got BBC Radio 1 playlisted. We played a session.
Yeah.
And we played the festival circuit, and we did well in the charts too. But then
let's go.
The label went bust.
What label was it?
It was called Sons.
Sons, okay.
Yeah, the Soul of North Staffs is the like the moniker, but they went bust. And the guy behind it was completely immovable on us getting our like publishing back, our recording rights back. And that's a whole story.
So he couldn't get him back, or he did?
I couldn't get him back. He was determined he was going to start a streaming company, and he wanted to use the catalog of the label to be like the catalyst for people to use it.
Interesting.
So he wanted to have full control, and we signed contracts that only a stupid 19-year-old would sign.
Of course, as you do. Well, that's super interesting, man. Okay, so how long did you guys tour though? Like, was that like a whole thing? Were you like, I'm gonna be a musician for the rest of my life, or
I mean, up until being 22 and that label going under, we were touring. I mean, the UK is a different beast. You don't really tour in the UK. You just play shows every week, and you can drive more or less anywhere that you need to.
It's like a couple states kind of here, right? Like the tri-state area.
Right. If you were going to do a run, you could do a run up to Nashville from here.
Interesting.
I don't think there's anywhere that we would play that was further than Nashville from Athens.
Wow. Okay. Interesting. I just never really thought of that. That's cool.
So it was nice because you would have kind of a rhythm. We all had a bunch of part-time jobs and that kind of thing, and you would live for playing those shows. And you'd get back at 3-4 in the morning because you'd be driving back, and
of course,
it was awesome.
Yeah, this reminds me of like old school bands, like the Police Stories and shit like that. It's like driving back in the middle of the night, it's freezing, that kind of stuff. That's cool.
Well, my main gig was I was a delivery driver, and I had my own van because it was like, okay, well, if I get a van for the band, then I can use it to make money.
Love it.
And the van that I got, speaking of the police, was we called them Black Mariahs. They're basically the prison cell vans. And it still had the prison cell in the back.
Really?
And
for the gear?
I'll never forget. There's like a story I haven't said in a while, but I was on a delivery. I was delivering secure documents for an attorney.
Okay, wild for starters.
And it was a Friday. It was the last delivery. It was like 4:59 that I was delivering this thing.
Okay.
So I go into reception. I give them I get back in the van, and then I hear this click behind me, and the jail cell closed, and I was stuck inside it. And the keys to it were on my
oh my god,
were on my van keys, and they were in the ignition. And so thank goodness that morning we used to play in suits, like mohair suits.
Yeah.
You got to dry clean those things once a week, otherwise it's going to be stinky.
It's a thing.
And thankfully, the dry cleaner put the suits on wire coat hangers.
Okay.
So I was able to make
a tool. Jimmy your way up there?
But
that's a crazy story, dog.
It was pretty wild. I was like, this is how I die.
Stomach drops when that happens, right? That would have been quite the ending.
Yeah, cell phone was on the driver's seat. I was like, oh no.
That's honestly crazy that you could even reach it. Was it a shorter van? It
was like a Sprinter, but the cell was right at the back. And I think it was like 3 different coat hangers that I ended up putting together to actually get it.
Wow, dude. That's wild, man. I bet you guys have hella story. All right, so you're touring out of this van. How long do you guys think you toured for? A couple years, I imagine?
Really, we didn't start touring until I was 18 because I was out of school at that point, and the band was young. I think I was the oldest, and we were separated by 3 years.
Okay.
Basically one person of each age. So we started touring on weekends after I left school, and then as the other guys started finishing, we were able to tour any night of the week.
Interesting.
So I think that would have been, like a good 4 years.
That's a lot.
The road and
interesting. And how long into that 4-year trek did you guys kind of get signed, or was it at the start kind of?
Very start.
Really? Yeah. I feel like that's an England thing to happen, right? Like they kind of pick up on it. Like
well, the weirdest thing was my band played their first headline show at our local venue in Stoke, which is called the Sugar Mill.
Okay.
And I'd say it's kind of like 40 watt size.
Yeah, I love that.
And so we played that. The guy from the label came up to us at the end of the show and was like, I want to put a single out with you guys. And, he talked a really good game. And honestly, they were a great label all the way up until the point that they weren't.
As the stories go.
Yeah, exactly. And I think, honestly, we had a pretty good experience. It was my only experience. Like,
gotcha.
You're in school still, and someone's like, I want to put you on a record label. Yeah. You say no to that. How do you do that?
Yeah. Interesting. Okay. So you do that for a while. You kind of toured UK a bunch. I'm just going to touch on this a little bit more before we get to the vinyl and stuff. But I find this very interesting as a band guy. What's your favorite spot to play in England? Like, what were the touring rounds you guys hit? And was it like, I'm trying to even imagine.
I think the best thing about touring in the UK is honestly the festival circuit. But
interesting.
In terms of venues, the 100 Club in London is kind of like the place that you want to go. It's got a great atmosphere. It's a great room.
Is it 100 cap too, or is that just kind of the name?
No, it's just the name. I think it's but it's still small. It's like a 300 cap.
Yeah, that's awesome. Love that size.
And that's what I think the UK is really good at. Yeah. It's like every town has its like 300 cap club, and then you've got pubs, which is something that we don't really do here. So there was a lot of
pub bands.
Yeah, it was funny. There's some photographs of us literally like. There was no stage. We were playing amongst the kind of lounge seating,
the corner,
and like the guitarist is there standing on one of these tables.
Those are good memories, dude. I love that. Those are the glory days. I love it. That's awesome. Okay, interesting. See, I've always thought it but like when I think about England, I think about it as kind of like 3 states in America, and like I'm like, guys, like we should try to tour England. Like I'm sure there's 300, 100 cap clubs in every city that like need bands, right?
Big time, and I think that also. The key to the UK is, can you get a radio plugger? So if you can get somebody who will plug your release and you've got a good story.
Okay.
If you can get on the radio, that's your ticket to ride for like playing shows. But I also feel like if you've got a good live reputation in the US, that UK festival circuit is going to pick you up. They're desperate for.
Interesting, like the Reading, Leeds, Glastonbury, kind of bigger ones, I guess.
Increasingly, they're struggling for grassroots stuff.
Really? Interesting, because like I think of stuff like kind of like you mentioned being on Radio 1. Like Radio 1 is like a very British thing that's not here, if I'm not mistaken. And like I think of bands like Catfish in the Bottom and like pretty much blowing up from doing like a lot of Radio 1 stuff, right? You know what I mean?
Catfish in the Bottom.
Have you really? That's like one of my favorite bands ever. That's awesome.
I think they just put their first record out, but as a demo.
No way. Okay, that's cool. How was that? Was that a cool experience?
Killer show,
dude. Yes, that's so.
It was one of those shows where I was like, okay, you guys are gonna do something.
Yeah, like they're good. You guys are really fucking good.
Yeah.
Any other bands you guys play with or done anything? Or what's the name of your band though? I think I might have missed this. What did you say the name was?
Yeah, the band was the Novellos.
The Novellos. How do you spell that?
Novellos. Novellos.
Interesting. Okay, cool. I'm going to have to check it out.
And honestly, it was a whirlwind. But probably the biggest act that we played with was the guys from the Libertines.
Oh yeah, of course.
They all went on to their separate.
Yeah, a little solo project kind of thing.
So we played with Dirty Pretty Things.
Okay.
And Baby Shambles. And God, I'm trying to think back all those years. Right but on the festival circuit, we played with some awesome people like the Magic Numbers we were on just before, and then Lemonheads we were on right before.
That's cool. Yeah. Really? All right, so when you say festival circle, do you mean like, because when I think of festivals, I think of the big ones, but like you probably mean more like not the Glastonburys, not the Leeds and Readings, right? Like what do you think?
No, we're really good at local festivals, I think, in the UK. I mean, like, I think Athfest is great here.
Yeah, I enjoyed it.
Porchfest is solid. But the UK, every sort of main city or conurbation has something like that. And they're really well funded, like Arts Council funded and that kind of thing. Yeah. So they get good bands.
Yeah, okay. That's cool because like when I think of it, like everybody's always talking about how like the England crowds are like the festival, like that's the thing there, like the crowds are wilder, that kind of stuff. Like I've always been really interested in that. Like I would kill somebody to go to like Reading or Glastonbury or something like that. So that's so interesting.
Well, the nail in the coffin when we decided to, because the label was in dire straits and we knew it, they knew it.
They knew that we knew.
And there was it was a bullshit. Sorry, I shouldn't cuss.
Oh, you can. Feel free.
It was this bullshit power play by the guy that was running the label. We'd been booked for Glastonbury.
Yeah.
And
that's cool.
We were trying to like wrestle our way to some independence from the label because we were like, we don't want to put all our eggs in this basket right now.
Yes.
And so they pulled the plug on our Glastonbury date.
No, dude. Oh, God. That
says a lot about them. All of your friends and loved ones, I've made it. I'm going to play Glastonbury, and then having to tell them all some wishy-washy story of why.
Man, interesting. Well, I guess piggybacking off that, what was something, I guess a lot of bands don't really get signed these days, especially in the States, I guess. But like, if you were to tell any young band something about getting signed, what would you say? Like any advice?
I think you've got to go as long and hard as you can without it, and I wish that that's the path that we'd had. That said, the work ethic that I think you need and the resilience that you need to do it on your own is not easily come by, particularly if you're in a band of like 4 or 5 people. There's always going to be one person who is not exactly
somewhat engaged,
phoning it in a little bit.
Interesting. That's great advice. Because I feel like, especially in the U.S., where it seems like little rock bands don't really get signed. I'm sure they do. Don't get me wrong. But like, it seems like I know like a bunch of like bands that are just like annihilating stuff, selling shit out, and they're like not even worried about it. You know what I mean? It's like do your thing as long as you can, and then when it's like time, it's time. When you have the leverage.
I look back on it, and because we got signed, the roster of the band was locked in very quickly. Actually, what they did is they took another band that they'd signed to the label, chopped both bands in half, and joined us together.
Interesting.
We kept our name. They lost their name.
Tough draw.
Yeah.
That's some label shit right there.
Yeah. And so, I'm there like basically firing one of my best friends from the drums.
Yes.
And then the guys that joined the band were awesome, but like no one was in it in the same way that me and Adam were, who was on bass, and I don't think they'd even mind me saying that. But I think that's the thing I would give advice is whoever your 4 or 5 members are, make sure you're all in it and you want it, and then just do the work.
Interesting.
Be the hard-working band.
Just never quit kind of thing. And I could see it changing once you start doing stuff like that from like 4 guys riding around in a van trying to sell shit out to like 4 guys that are just in the van, you know, like very much put together kind of thing, right?
Yeah.
That's so interesting, man. Okay, so you finish touring, and then you go to Columbia. Is that kind of the time frame, or you go to college
there was
and then
kind
Columbia?
of a full start because whilst the label was in its death throes, I was like, okay, I need a off ramp here.
Okay.
So I was like, I'm going to apply for a bunch of UK colleges, but what I'd really like to do is to go overseas. I'd fallen in love with New York.
Amazing.
And so I applied, and I applied in person. I took the application
Really?
form. Yeah. And I wrote it all out, and then they actually accepted my application. And then it was this huge scramble on how an international, you know, I would say pretty blue collar upbringing kid was going to afford an Ivy League education. And they're really good at selling you on we have financial aid packages that does not apply to international students.
Gotcha.
You are the cash cow.
Interesting.
So,
they saw dollar signs kind of thing, right?
Yeah, so I had a scholarship, but I went for 1 semester, eviscerated any money that I'd saved.
Quickly in New York, I imagine, right?
Yeah. And this was like kind of the rock bottom moment because I was like, okay, I just need a job or multiple jobs that will pay. Yeah. I'm going to do that for a year. Okay. And I'm going to try and go back. Okay. And a friend of mine who would come into the pub that I used to work at in the UK, I was back visiting my family on spring break. And I was like, look, if anyone's got a lead on a job, I need a job starting in like a month. Yeah. And she worked in finance. She sold stocks and bonds.
Really?
In Germany, in Munich. Okay. And she was like, look, we have offices around the world. Yeah. You can speak to a recruiter. And I think at that point, with the bad taste in my mouth of everything that had just happened with music, I was really rebounding to everything that wasn't. Okay. And, you know, the appeal of like some Wall Street career.
Stability, like 401k kind of shit, right?
And, you know, so I took the job, and the job was in Barcelona. What a place to go. And,
wow. Yeah.
And
sick.
And it was hard. Like, I think that if there was a point at which I honed my work ethic and my ability to just fucking wade through shit to get where I want to go. It was that and it took 3 years to save the money to go back to college.
Wow. Okay.
And everyone's like, you're not going to go back.
Yeah.
I was like, well, watch me.
Oh, wow. I will say that's impressive. Most people are like, I'm going to take a gap year. It's like, all right, they dropped out. You know what I mean? So good for you,
I
man.
think people thought I was lost to Spain forever. And the worst thing was, I went back for 3 years and I still ran out of money. But it is what it is.
That's crazy. Okay. So at the time, you're doing the Wall Street kind of thing, or like the remote, I guess. You're just dialing in. What are you majoring in Columbia?
When I first started, because I was keen on this finance path, I'd started taking the econ track. Okay. And what I love about the U.S. system, of like the liberal arts system, is that you can change as you go. Okay. They didn't have a business concentration. I was born and raised in an entrepreneurial family, so I knew I wanted that skill set. So I did the business concentration, but there was no major. Okay. And I fell out in love with econ right around the time that I had to do calculus. It wasn't a coincidence.
Canon event.
Yeah, and as one of my electives, I had taken this documentary filmmaking class.
That's cool.
And it just like lit something up in me. You know, I love storytelling. I think business is storytelling.
Of course,
life is storytelling.
Yes.
And so I ended up piecing together these classes from the journalism school and from the film school, and I did basically a nonfiction film major with a business concentration. And that was awesome. That
sounds great, yeah.
Yeah.
Kind of like piece together your own kind of major sort of thing?
Exactly.
That's great.
And what was good is at the time I could only really work cash in hand because I was an international student. And
when you say cash in hand, what do you mean?
Like can't be on the books, can't be on payroll.
Interesting.
And so I was working for, basically New York-based filmmakers that just needed cheap labor.
Yeah, okay.
So camera assistant work, boom work, that kind of thing.
Hard knocks kind of stuff.
It was good fun.
Yeah.
It was like long hours, hard work.
Okay.
The money was pretty darn good. And lots of like really fascinating experiences came out of that.
Cool, man. Okay. Well, that's surprising. See, I wouldn't have guessed that if you said that. It's kind of like you want to major in business, but you still have to do the craft that you're going to do, right? Like you can be taught about business, but you still have to apply it, right?
Yeah. I think everyone should do principles of economics at some point because it's kind of like giving you the universe that you live in a kind of theoretical form.
Yeah.
I think that the application of those principles is when you start getting heavily into statistics and extrapolating everything out. But I think just understanding, for instance, how supply and demand works, like
it's huge just for understanding.
Yeah.
And it's like a lot of, I mean, like all that stuff really applies to damn near whatever you're going to do. There's a lot of bands in particular, and I guess this is very music industry based because that's kind of what I do. But like the worst thing a band can have is like a bad business leader kind of thing. You know what I mean? It's like you can be as good as you want. If you're not good at the business, you're in trouble. You know what I mean? So like understanding like how everything kind of flows, I'm sure that was just super useful for whatever you decided to go in.
Big time.
And at this time, did you know, like, were you like, I'd really love to do vinyl, I'd really love to do more music stuff, I'd really love to do this, or you were just trying to get a foothold?
By the time I got back to New York, I knew. So that first semester, I was doing economics. By the time I had lived in Spain for 3 years, worked in finance, knew that. I mean, it just didn't get me up in the morning.
Yeah.
I was good at it. I was good at selling. And so towards the end of my time in Spain, I'd started to try and find my way back. I'd started picking up the guitar, which, I'd basically mothballed and playing and writing. And I was like, okay, awesome. This still feels like it did when I was 16.
Yeah, there's still a passion there, kind of.
But I was like, okay, well, can I help shepherd people through this experience that I had without some of the downside?
Yes. Okay.
And so when I got back to the States and I was at school, I started a label that was the intersection of this like passion for storytelling and documentary filmmaking and music. And what we were doing was there's this kind of dance hall phenomenon in the UK that's been going since early 70s, late 60s.
When you say dance hall, you mean like kind of like acid kind of clubs, like a hacienda kind of thing?
I mean, like the precursor to all of that.
Oh, really? Okay.
But it was people getting down to R&B and soul.
Okay, cool.
And it was a huge blue collar movement, and it was called Northern Soul. And the reason it was called Northern Soul is because it was Northern Englishmen buying records, and it was actually a London record store owner who the football fans that were coming to watch their team play a London team that weekend, they would all come to the record stores and they'd be going through the bins.
Yeah.
And this guy identified that all these lads from up north wanted this particular kind of rare soul, this very danceable rare soul, and so he coined it Northern Soul.
Okay, interesting. I'm very unfamiliar with this. This is cool.
It's an interesting phenomenon. It's as problematic as it is fascinating.
Okay.
You've got a bunch of white working class people in the UK at a time where we're going through mining strikes, we're going through labor unionization, and like a deep empathy with Black America and soul music.
Yeah.
And I think what it was okay, this was very danceable music, but as the Motowns of the world progressed into like Rick James, funk, that sort of thing.
Of course.
They felt left behind, so they started looking for everything else that was perhaps current to that original Motown sound that they hadn't heard yet.
Interesting.
And so you can see how it ties into more and more of a rare soul, like looking for one-hit wonders.
Yeah, like a specific thing that's not Motown, kind of like a resurgence kind of.
And where I think it got a little bit ugly was it put a lot of credibility in someone's ability as a DJ to find a record and then to play it in a dance hall. So the DJ kind of became the creative, became the artist.
Okay.
And because of that, they would be traveling to the US, digging through 7-inch records, coming back, putting together a killer set of stuff that people hadn't heard yet.
Okay.
And it created a really bad equilibrium of how everyone was incentivized. Like the DJ didn't want other DJs to know what the record was.
Interesting.
So they called it cover-ups. They would basically put a white label on the record.
Really?
Yeah. And
that's crazy.
And it got to the point where they were even putting false names, false labels. Wow. And so when I kind of uncovered this, obviously this is going back to like 2012. So like Facebook is very much a thing.
Starting to happen.
Yeah. And I was always an avid collector of 7-inch records, but I didn't really understand this social dynamic. And it was around about that time that I was like, I wonder if there's a new audience for this music. And in asking that question, I was like, but where are these people now?
Yeah. And like the artist or the listener?
The artist and the writer. So then I started looking through the labels on all of these things and just doing deep research. And the kind of light bulb moment was this band called the Epitome of Sound, who were based in New Jersey. So only like a hop, skip, and a jump from where I was. And I found the guy, Robert Palladino, who was the writer. I found him on Facebook. So I reached out to him and was like, firstly, do you realize that you have a huge cult following for your music in the UK and Europe? And he was like, no.
Wow.
I was like, okay, so what have you been doing for the last 40, 50 years? And he's like, I've been a telesalesman.
Really? Yeah. Interesting. So they hadn't even seen the bounds of what had happened over there with it?
Yeah. So the first thing I did is I picked up my camera. I drove over to his house, and I love the footage because it was me just trying to figure out what the hell I was doing as a documentary filmmaker. But it was this moment of going, well, hey, there's obviously a lot of upset that's being bubbled up because you didn't realize your success, perhaps because of people
trying to hide it.
Up.
Yeah. Okay.
And they actually the cover up of that band. So the band was called Epitome of Sound, and the cover up label that they put on it was by Moses Smith. So just a completely fabricated name. And so there's a lot of angst and sadness that comes with that. Like, I've been doing a job that I didn't like for my entire life, and I could have been a successful musician.
Yeah, I bet that is very frustrating.
And so that really lit a fire in me, and we only ended up doing 6 or 7 releases because it was so work intensive.
Gotcha.
Finding these people, doing the rights clearance,
hunting them down,
then the marketing, and just getting it out there.
Yeah.
But that was also my first foray into vinyl.
That's really cool.
This was all vinyl sales. We did the DSPs, but it was all vinyl was the revenue for the label.
Interesting. All right, so you would kind of re-release them as a compilation kind of thing? Is that what you mean?
Singles. 7-inch singles.
Okay, interesting.
Yeah, and what's kind of cool about the UK is our chart system. At the time, we had a main top 40.
Yeah.
And then we had what was called the independent top 40.
Okay.
And at the time, the independent top 40 was based on physical sales. So download wasn't being incorporated.
Yeah.
And so as an independent band, you actually had a really real shot if you mobilized your fan base to getting into the top 10, top 40 of the independent chart.
And how many copies would it take to do that for
For us, so my band, we got number 2 on about 5,000 singles.
Really?
Sold.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay. And this is what year was that? What had that been?
That would have been 2008.
2008. Okay. Interesting. Yeah. And that doesn't include like iTunes and stuff back then?
No, I remember like when we were trying to chart, I think there was like a couple DSPs that if you downloaded from would actually report to the charts.
Yeah.
But we were focused on physical. So HMV was the main record store in the UK.
Yeah.
And we were like every day of the week that we were aiming for the bullet in the charts.
Yeah.
We were driving to different university towns and with like a street team.
Yeah,
and just,
Hard Knocks kind of thing.
Yeah, it's basically saying, hey, this would mean a lot to us if you
go a long
check
way.
out my band. It's like $5 in that record store over there.
Yeah.
So we did that.
So the report is a sale. That's so, and I've heard of people doing stuff like linking it to a T-shirt. Like you buy a T-shirt and you get a record, you can count it as the sort of thing. That's fascinating. All right, so that was your first kind of foray into vinyl was the documentary, which is very interesting. By the way, music documentary is like my favorite thing to watch on the planet. So that's very cool. And then you kind of like figure out through that you have an interest in like maybe being a part of a vinyl team, or you were kind of already producing it, or you were just like outsourcing it, right? Like
we were outsourcing it, and I really wasn't all that thorough even on where I was getting stuff made. It was really down to how quickly.
Of course.
And even back then in 2012, it was like 27 weeks, I remember.
Wow.
Very specifically, I was like, I'm going to get this in 27 weeks.
Half a year later, pretty much.
So I'm going to have to pay. And, that seemed incredulous at the time. But by the time I got into manufacturing during the pandemic, it was a lot longer. There were people waiting for like a year that's plus.
Great. See, that like it's so hard to route your whole album release tour around. Like that's like a whole thing, right? Like
you just don't do it. You just go, okay,
no vinyl, CDs. It is, I guess, which is a shame. But that's interesting. All right, so now what do you guys have it down to? Because I know like a huge part of y'all's pitch is probably like on demand, like quick, right? I imagine.
Yeah. So the the range we like to give people is from 4 to 12 weeks.
That's great.
And that's obviously quite a big spectrum.
Still better than 27.
But it's down to like, do you want to have test pressings before we go into production, or do you want us to do in-house quality control to make sure they sound good? So if we do an in-house, we can in theory get something on press after 4 weeks.
Okay.
But caveat is, if we pick up on something that we think you're not going to like, then we're going to have to stop the production run.
And what usually would be some of those sort of things, like kind of like
clicks, pops, skips. You know, I mean, some are more egregious than others. I mean, I have a pretty high tolerance for surface noise on my vinyl because I've been collecting.
Yeah, it just has that. Like I kind of like it when it makes a noise every now and then. I'm like, this is
reminds
me
that I'm listening to a thing.
Yeah. A little crack and pop's fine.
And you know, I would love that everyone had such tolerant ears, but they don't. And that's and so you also have to.
Well, I guess. Yeah.
And so if it's a real time crunch for somebody up front, we'll say, look, there is always a very real possibility that at the point we receive the stampers for your project, it's not going to sound exactly how you want it to, and it's your choice. We can either go back to square one and get a new cut, or we can proceed.
Interesting.
So that's where the 12 weeks really kicks in. It's like 8 to 12 means that you can do a pretty thorough job of test pressing. If you need to do a recut, you can probably fit it in.
Interesting.
Yeah.
That's very cool. All right, so let me back up because I jumped ahead some, but that's great intel, by the way. I love that. Okay. So once you're done with Columbia and you're done with UK, you're in America still, when do you kind of get to Athens, or when do you kind of get to Echo Base, or when do you kind of get to whatever your first Athens or vinyl foray was after the DJ kind of thing?
So I started my label while I was at school.
Yeah, that's right.
We got to the point on that 6th release where I was so frustrated with how long it would take to get, because it creates a knock-on effect. Like, I'm going to put money down to get this made. Yeah. And then the artist is not going to see their money until I've got paid.
Gotcha.
And so you're talking like a 1-year cycle for somebody to just see a check.
Exactly. And it's a band. They're struggling already. Like, they're already touring hard, that kind of stuff.
And so another kind of kismet moment was I was there calling around looking for any new pressing plant opening. And there was a press release for one in Oakland, California. Okay. And so I cold called the guy and said, hey, I have this really big following for people buying vinyl records. Would you be interested in me doing business development for the plant? Yeah. And in return, you can dedicate some capacity to the label. Yeah. And so he came to visit me in New York. Wow. Did kind of like a job interview of sorts. Yeah. And then he offered me a job to move to California.
Awesome. Okay.
So I was there for 3 years through until the pandemic, and that startup pretty unfortunately went by the way. They built the pressing plant, but PG&E was the utilities company in California at the time, went bankrupt.
Wow. Okay.
And so the building needed a pretty significant upgrade to the gas for the record press to work, and that wasn't happening. So the investor foreclosed on his investment. It was fairly amicable. It's like, okay, we can't wait around for 3 years.
Not viable. Okay.
So that was kind of the end of that. But I started working for another record pressing shop that was in town, a place called 16 Kilohertz. Okay. And Mark, the guy that ran it all on his own, he had been developing an electric record press that he actually operated from his home, from his apartment. Yeah.
Interesting. Okay.
And I was just so inspired by this guy. I was like, okay, I want to do this. I want to make my own thing, make my own way of doing it.
Skip the middleman kind of thing, right?
And then pandemic hits. Being in Oakland was not financially tenable with all of that uncertainty. And so I moved back to the UK for the pandemic, which was one of the best things I've ever done. I got to really spend a lot of time with my family that I hadn't for years. And that's awesome. Midway through the pandemic, I get a call from Ryan and Cash, who were heading up Kindercore. We'd met at like an industry conference. Okay. And they were like, hey, we could kind of use someone that with your skill set here. We've got this plan. And I'd already worked with them as a customer. Okay. And So I came and visited, and then I liked it, and I came and just moved here.
Yeah, just moved to Athens.
And it was supposed to be a contract for like 3 months, consulting.
Here we are still.
Yeah, because I decided I was going back to school. I was going to finish school.
Okay.
I very quickly turned into full-time operations director, and I was there for 2 years. By the end of that 2 years, I was like, okay, I know that I don't want to work for somebody else anymore.
Gotcha.
Or I would have a very specific criteria for who that would be.
Yeah.
I want to start my own thing.
Yeah.
And so I started Echo Base about 2 years.
Okay.
Here.
Sweet. Yeah. That's so, dude, I feel you there, because there's a certain thing in me. It's just like, dude, I just don't want to work for anybody. Like something inside me, like it's got to be an amazing person for me to want to work with them. You know what I mean?
Yeah. And it can kind of bring out the best and the worst, because I was working for people. It's their dream, it's their vision.
Yeah.
And with that, it kind of divorces you from the ego of the business, which is good. So you're really just approaching it from objective truth.
Yes.
You're not profitable, you are profitable,
Gotcha.
etc. But the downside is that if you have that like willful desire to be the creator, you can't.
You can't step into that role just like that.
No, and so it creates struggle. And we definitely had friction when I was at Kindercore with the original founders of the business.
Yeah.
Some of it like creative, productive friction, and some of it just ugly, honestly.
Yeah, interesting. See, I hadn't realized that it had gone away. Sorry to cut you off, but like Kindercore, I was aware of it. I was never... How long was Kindercore thing? 3-5 years? Something like that?
I think 5 years.
5 years? And I was never aware of it. I was aware of like the M-Bus internship kind of things and like the ads at Newsies, but it never really seemed like everybody entirely got on board to where like it was like, oh, if you're getting a record press, it's at Kindercore kind of thing, right? Yeah,
and I think that's a few reasons. One, it's never going to be the cheapest thing to manufacture domestically. Like there are factories in Taiwan, there are factories in the Czech Republic that will make a record cheaper.
Yeah.
But I think also, not to be understated, is how hard it is to start a record pressing facility.
Yeah.
And Ryan and Cash did a really remarkable job, but I think by the time they had spent what they had in both terms of money, energy, time, that going that extra mile of like, critically appraising their marketing strategy and brand and PR and all of that, they were just burnt out.
Interesting. I could totally see that. Yeah.
And so when I got there, it was so clear to me that Kindercore was like a diamond in the rough. They had this wonderful team of people that were super dedicated. They just needed a little bit of, I think, direction and that objectivity, like being on the outside looking in rather than it being your baby.
Which is, I guess that's easier to do, and it's nice that you've tasted that as the now somewhat, I guess, assume the complete leader that you or Drew, I don't know, but like since you've been led before in the same industry, now you can kind of lead better, right? Has that been like?
And I've got two partners in Echo Base, which is Drew Beskin and Brandon Page.
I'm not familiar with Brandon.
Oh, you should hang with him sometime.
Yeah, maybe we'll have him on here too.
It's so awesome. They have such different skill sets to me.
Yeah.
Drew, very well. He's incredibly enigmatic, engaging.
Yeah.
Disarmingly so.
People are naturally drawn to him.
Yeah, and so he's a great person, and he's been there, done that, got the t-shirt when it comes to music and being an independent musician. So like, what better person to become that like conduit between us and an independent artist and labels. Brandon, he worked with me at Kindercore.
Okay.
And he's this incredibly kinetic and engineering minded person, but he just never got the degree in it,
Okay, interesting.
He's always figured it out for himself, and there's no hesitation for him to, if his car breaks down, he's going to fix it himself. He's that kind of guy.
Yeah.
And so we have this really balanced skill set. I think what you learn from working for someone else is how you don't want to be treated.
Of course, yeah.
And a little bit of how you do.
Yes.
And so getting to incorporate that, and it's a right balance between giving someone agency and giving them accountability is hard.
And it's interesting because, like, especially somebody like Drew, who's so like, honestly, you seem the same way, like down to earth, like just a cool dude, you know? So it's like you guys can really set up the business in a way where it's not like I'm the big boss, like I'm the, like you better be on your fucking P's and Q's when I'm around kind of thing, which is great. And from everybody I've talked to that works there, like Noah and everybody, that they love you guys. Like they're like, I love working for these guys, which is great. And it's kind of same kind of thing with Drew and you. And I can't speak for, you said it was Brandon, right?
Yeah.
I can't speak for Brandon because I've never met him, but like Drew and like you, like taking your application to Columbia, like that's the kind of shit that like just getting shit done kind of people. And Drew's one of those cats too, I think.
Big
you know
time.
What I mean? Right?
Big time. And I like to try and encourage that in the team as well.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm getting better at not kind of wrapping people in cotton wool. Like, okay, some of the most formative moments of my, development as a professional came from being super uncomfortable.
Yeah. Okay.
And not knowing how to do something.
When you say super uncomfortable and not knowing how to do something, do you have any like examples of that, or like what's something like from your like coming up that's like a pivotal kind of?
Yeah.
Like, give me like a little short one, like just an example.
Straight into it. When I took that job in finance, I got offered the job and I was starting within 2 weeks.
Okay. Right? That's really quick.
And they were like, okay, you can't make a paycheck until you've passed these exams. Okay, so I now need to cram like months worth into this period of time. And then when I got there, I think that created a pretense that my education and knowledge was going to be deployed somehow. It was like, no, that was a compliance thing. You did that so that you could do this job, but the job is sales. Okay. And so on the spot every morning, it was like a boiler room environment. You would come in wearing your 3-piece suit. And you would sit in a meeting. Have you ever watched Glengarry Glen Ross?
No, I've not.
It's like a famous quote from that. It's about salespeople. And it's coffee is for closers. You don't ask for anything until you've closed some business.
Well said.
And it was that kind of environment. It was being held to a standard and not necessarily being given all of the tools. We did have training. We had sales coaching, things like that. But the expectation was they'll give you 10%, and the remaining 90 you have to figure out for yourself. Okay, gotcha. And so I was thrown in the deep end, just like dialing 200 cell phone numbers a day.
Yeah. And that'll build some character quick, I bet, right?
And it taught me a lot about how I would like to be treated in those situations. Like, okay, I just picked up the phone. I don't know who you are, and I don't have the time for this right now. Okay, how do you get around that?
You better connect quick kind of thing, right? Interesting.
And so that was huge, and it was painful and awful. Lots of long days and just awful amounts of rejection and self-doubt. But I became better through that. And so
character building kind of stuff, right?
Yeah. And so I want to give people those opportunities. I also just have this tendency of maybe being too respectful and too delicate. Of like, I've hired you to do this job. I don't want to push you too hard, but I'm getting, I think, better at that.
Becoming a leader is like one of those things that people don't really talk about, but like in business and stuff is like pretty fucking important. And it is like something you have to try to be good at, like a lot of bosses miss that, speaking from the outside, I guess. But that's so interesting that like sales, like that's another thing, kind of like business, like we talked about. Like sales is one of those things, like nobody will sell you better than you. Like you've got to learn how to sell if you want to be successful in damn near anything, right? Like, and 200 calls a day will do it, I bet, right?
Yeah, I mean, it beats it out of you. And I went through a lot of different phases in that role. Times where maybe I got a false positive because I got lucky on a sale, and then you lean a bit too much into the thing that you thought got you that. But I think that what it gave me was the ability to be reflexive and critical, but not harshly so of myself, like in a productive way. Like kind of look at myself and go, okay, what do you want to be? How do you want to be received?
Yes. And I'm sure this is translated to now when you're, I guess a huge part of your job, I'm sure, is still pretty much sales, right? Like, so you're still like day to day with a lot of people, right? On like huge vinyl fulfillment sort of things, right?
Yeah. I mean, there's a great book by Daniel Pinkman, which is To Sell Is Human, I think. And
To Sell Is Human, right there.
Yeah, like the nutshell is that, I mean, really everything that we're doing, like from an evolutionary standpoint, like we're selling to prospective partners, we're selling to be viable. And I think that the best way of selling is identifying the person that has a hair on fire problem.
Interesting.
And appropriately solving for it, because that person is going to want the solve. I don't need to be a secondhand car salesman. If I have something that I know that you need, and I'm just letting you know.
Yeah.
And so it flips the dynamic on its head, where you're actually like, you become your own sort of evangelist. You're there going, hey, like, we identified this really painful rub, and we're trying to solve it. Do you think you might be interested in that? It's very different than me calling me like, have you pressed vinyl records before? Why did you do that? Would you like to buy some?
Yes. Can I have a lot of money kind of thing, right? I'm trying to look at that same outlook for everything, because it's like, my kind of thing is like getting booked at venues. Like, I present them the solution. Like, I email them with a full band bill. Like, hey, we've got you something here that will, like, you offer it to them. You have to give them something instead of asking for something in a weird way.
That works in PR too.
Right?
I mean, we were on the cover of the Flagpole.
Yeah, that's awesome. I saw that. Great.
Yeah. And Sam, who wrote the article, she did a really great job. Like, I felt very seen and heard in the article. And so we actually engaged Sam after the fact. I'm like, hey, we want to put a press release out. We'd love to get more coverage like this.
Yeah.
What's the secret? And she's like, well, you already have it. I was like, well, what's that? She's like, you gave us everything we needed.
Yeah.
On day one.
Interesting.
Like, first email. And that's a Drew Beskin special.
Drew is excellent at that. Drew is cutting email chains down by the thousands every day.
Exactly.
Well, that's good, dude. That's amazing. Okay. That's so fascinating, by the way. I love that. Okay, so you've taken all that you learned from just years of life and business and sales and all that stuff, and you're kind of executing it now. This is year 3 of Echo Base, or year 2?
Yeah,
it's early, right?
In the 3rd year, so yeah.
Okay, so when you leave Kindercore was, I guess, 2022-ish, 2021?
It was the Christmas at the end of that year, and then January the following year, so that would have been 2022, January 22, that I started Echo Base.
And when you leave Kindercore and come and start Echo Base, which is a huge leap, by the way. Congratulations. It's awesome.
Thanks, man.
What is the main goal? I'm going to assume a lot of it was like obviously better delivery and like on demand kind of stuff, and like more artist orientated, more options. Like, what is the main mission statement on that? Right?
Yeah, I would say not necessarily like quote unquote better. I think that Kindercore, which is now called Classic City Vinyl Works, we still have a really close collaborative relationship with them.
Oh, that's great.
We press records for each other.
Yeah. I wasn't really even aware that was still a thing. I thought Kindercore had just gone away.
Oh, no, Classic City is still very much a thing.
Okay.
Definitely worth checking them out.
Yeah.
But when I was running that place, and I grew alongside a really awesome team, Kindercore, from making like 300,000 records a year to being on track to make 1 million.
Wow.
In the space of 2 years.
Record. That is a lot of records.
Yeah. and so there were lots of incredible achievements along the way, just in terms of like how you go about doing that, how you show up, how you're consistent, how you make good quality.
Yeah.
But as we got bigger, it always became less tenable to service that kind of ankle biter in the inbox of someone who's like, hey, I'm thinking about vinyl. I've never done it before. I've got 3 monthly listeners on Spotify.
I need 50 copies. It's like, well.
Yeah. And unfortunately, I think there's a lot of companies in our space that aren't trying to solve that problem. And it was abundantly clear to me that there wasn't. And that's the people that I associate with. That's my cohort. That's independent musicians that are just trying to
cut and buy,
get it going. Yeah.
Interesting.
And so
is that kind of where like the no minimums thing starts to come in, right?
Exactly.
Like the on demand stuff, right?
Yeah. I mean, we will press as many records as you want us to but even if it was one. Now, it would be a really expensive one record.
Yeah, of course,
we haven't solved 3D printing records or anything like that. But it's a willingness, and it's a state of mind. It's a way of thinking about something, and that was really born out of. I love podcasts. This is only the second one I've ever been on.
You're great at it, man. You have a great voice and a great intellect.
Oh, thanks, dude.
For real.
But what I love about the long form is that it gives you that mental space to really get into the details.
Kind of flow state sort of stuff, right?
And there's a great podcast called Masters of Scale by Reid Hoffman.
No, I'm unfamiliar.
Reid Hoffman is like one of these Silicon Valley greats, and in the first season of the podcast, which is the only season I've listened to, it's awesome. He would just interview these absolute giants of tech, like the head of people at Google.
Oh, wow.
And the episode that I love is with Brian Chesky from Airbnb.
Okay.
And it's about making a great product. Like, how do you build a great product? I think Brian has this really profound attitude towards customers and problem solving.
Yeah.
And there was two facets of his story. The first was he made a spectrum of what it's like to book a hotel from 1 to 10, 10 being excellent, perfect, in fact.
Yeah.
And 1 being really bad. And so it'd be like, okay, well, a 4 out of 10 is like, maybe I'm in, a motel.
Yeah,
6
days in,
like
days in, Super 8.
And it's clean, but, and I was able to book online, but, it's rough part of town. And then, okay, so we've got 4 on the board. What is 5?
Okay.
And he keeps going and he keeps going, and it's great to listen to.
Yeah.
And by the time you get into like 10, you're like, okay, well, where are we going with this? And it's like, okay, you're going on vacation in Hawaii. The hotel has already looked up your social media and sees that you are thinking about trying surfing. So they've already booked you a surfing lesson.
Interesting.
And as you get off the plane, it's like the second coming of the Beatles. There's people with placards and signs. And so you end up getting into fiction.
Okay.
And he would keep going into a point of almost absurdity.
Okay.
And the point was this: you're never going to do 90% of those things at like a 14 out of 10.
Yes.
But it gives you a North Star of whose problem you're trying to solve and why. And if you then come back down from 14, 13, 12, back to where you are today, it kind of gives you a roadmap of what the next thing is.
Yeah, okay.
And so how he applied that to his world was when he first started Airbnb. It was in New York City.
Okay.
And the big problem that they had was that people were really bad at taking pictures of their own apartments.
Interesting.
You got these like
could see that.
camera phone pictures. And he happened to be a photographer.
Yeah.
So he started reaching out to customers. They didn't know that he was the only one working there at this point.
Love it.
And he was like, I'm going to send a photographer around to take pictures of your apartment to make your listing more successful. So all of those early apartments were photographed by him so that it was professional.
Yeah.
I mean, and now on Airbnb, they give you guidelines.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay.
This is what we expect.
Yeah.
But they had to create that watermark. They had to say, hey, this is how we help you.
Yeah.
Help yourself.
Interesting. That's fascinating.
So I apply that to what we're doing. And
I think that tracks because it's like, I think of that like in a weird way. I don't know if you ever use Facebook Marketplace, but like half of selling something on Facebook Marketplace is a good picture. Like, you know what I mean?
Yeah. It's honestly like a recreational pastime for me. It's going on Marketplace.
I love it, dude. I love it. Even when I don't have money to buy anything, I'm on there just like scouting, just in case, man.
It's like, wow, this exists.
I totally don't need this.
For only $75.
That's so interesting.
Yeah.
Okay, so you've taken that approach at EchoBase in a way. It's like presentation. And a lot of it, I assume, kind of as you guys, I mean, how many units are you guys pressing at EchoBase now a year?
Goodness. So we're a hybrid in the sense that we press what records we can or what it makes sense to in-house. And then we work with manufacturing partners. So we have one in Memphis, and then we also work with Classic City here locally.
Okay.
So if it's urgent and needs doing or is like a specialty product, then that automatically gets made in-house.
Okay.
And then from there, it's really a factor of priority. Okay, when's your release date? If it's a while out and we can schedule it on this press, we will. If it's not, it will go through one of our partners. And so I would say like in-house, we can make about 2,500 records a week. Not a whole lot.
No, that's a ton. That seems like a lot. That's great.
But I think last year we were responsible for making over 300,000 records.
Wow, dude, that's impressive, man. Good for y'all, dude. Okay. And how many of those are like international label acts, and how many of those are like just like local band? Like, would you guys focus be like the more like Southeastern touring band kind of thing, or it's really whoever's?
It's shifting all the time. And when we first started, we were very much focused on B2B. So we were Bandcamp's pilot vinyl program. We were like the back end of that.
Cool.
And still are to this day. And we learned so much from doing that, because Bandcamp's a really big business, and it's really hard to make like nimble, dynamic decisions when you're that big. And so what we were able to do is go, okay, well, clearly Bandcamp is solving a need, because all these people want to work with them to get their records made.
Okay. Yeah.
But we think that we could add some bells and whistles to that experience if we were the ones responsible for it. And so we started working directly with artists last October.
Okay.
And we had kind of private books. Like, we worked with independent artists all through the last 2 years, but we hadn't built a service yet.
Okay.
So it wasn't really until October when I brought Drew in. I was like, okay, we're going to do this on-demand thing. We're going to figure out how to do it better than anyone.
Yeah. Now it's kind of like the cornerstone, right? Because I looked at the website and I was like, oh, wow, a huge deal of this is like how quick it can be, and like how you can do the pre-sale for bands, and like, you know, for like local bands that can't just shell out $9,000 for 200 vinyls or whatever, you know?
So the next steps for that are, okay, well, we want people to create a project and assemble all of their assets in one place, and then we'll start making it.
Yeah.
But how can we reward success? Like, okay, if you sell 100 records on pre-order in the first week, what can I do to help you sell the next 100?
Interesting.
And so we've started building this product that I hope will really get out there in the world by the end of the year, which is kind of the back end to the on-demand campaign. Like, Kickstarter would expect you to bring all of your own people. Right?
Okay. Yeah.
We're like, okay, how can we actually shoulder some of that burden?
Yeah.
And one of the things that people struggle with the most is getting their records into record stores.
Okay, yeah, I could see that.
And so the idea is, okay, you sell 100 on pre-order yourself. Yeah. You've just graduated to like local hero status.
Okay.
We're going to solicit orders from Georgia record stores.
Gotcha.
Okay, if Georgia record stores pick up X number of records, let's say another 500, then we'll do a regional solicitation, and then a national solicitation, and then international solicitation.
And you guys are kind of shopping it around at those record stores?
Exactly, yeah.
Wow,
so
okay.
We work mainly through distributors, but a big part of our program this year is building direct relationships with record stores, interviewing them, finding out what's bad about how they buy records now.
Okay.
You know, usually they just get a spreadsheet, right?
Yeah.
And they have to like look for bands that they understand, and you're making a lot of quick decisions. So we want to make that experience better. What if we told you how many monthly Spotify listeners they have?
Gotcha.
What if we told you where their regional strengths and markets are? What if we told you how many Instagram followers they have?
Interesting.
And what can we offer as like an upsell? Like, okay, if you order, let's say you're a big online retailer like Turntable Lab. Yeah. All right, if you buy 100 or more of these for your store, we'll make an exclusive color.
Interesting. Okay.
So that's where it's going. And really where we're at right now is, okay, can we just satisfy creating a pre-order campaign or an on-demand campaign? Yeah. And do a good job. But we're already trying to.
Fascinating. Yeah. Okay, see, that's the kind of thing that could like change you guys from like just another printing place to like, there's certain perks to printing with EchoBase. It's like, all right, we're literally getting our stuff shopped around if our pre-sale does good. Like, we're dual motivations, almost like record label kind of stuff, like kind of off your record label back in the day, like kind of different but the same, you know. It's like that's the kind of shit where I feel like in Athens especially, there's like, as you stay in Athens longer, you kind of see there's just certain things that bands, like all of them will do. Like all the bands want to do insert thing. All the bands want to be on this podcast, they want to be on Parker Whirling Show, that kind of stuff. Yep. And it's like if EchoBase could turn into one of those things where it's like, if I'm in Athens or even just the Southeast and I need a record made, going to EchoBase because it's got all the perks. That's kind of the name of the game, right? I
think so. And I think, I mean, we want to be really discerning in the sense that, like, I don't want to wake up and be solving a problem for a major label at the cost of solving a problem for an independent artist. We're always going to be skewed towards that. And I say with great affection that there are artists that I hope will kind of graduate from needing our services.
Yeah. Totally fair.
Maybe they're, like a great example is bands like Goose, where they just sell vinyl hand over fist, and
amazing.
They're building a business, and they don't necessarily need all the bells and whistles of what we've got.
Interesting.
That said, there's tons of really established independent artists that have just gone independent.
Yeah.
A good example right now is we're working with a Venezuelan act called Mau Iriki.
Mau Iriki, I'm not familiar.
One of the biggest acts in Latin America.
Wow, okay.
I think like 70 million monthly listeners on Spotify.
Huge.
They've never pressed a record before.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow. And they're printing with you guys now?
Yeah, so we're doing record pressing with them at the minute.
Yeah.
So that's the thing. If we're not solving that problem, that kind of freshman, sophomore project, then we're doing something wrong.
Interesting. And that's just like a great niche to have. Like knowing your niche is huge. Like kind of like you, like, I don't know how I'm trying to say it, but like that, how many people are there in vinyl that are really like have ran a vinyl shop like you know what I mean? It's like, it's like a niche skilled in business, you know what I mean? Which is great that you're, obviously getting good at it. And all right, so you kind of freshman, sophomore, that breaks down a lot too, that you kind of want to stay focused on that and like not helping the big dogs, like I guess Goose when you need to and the Venezuela guy, but like still having a focus on like independent, right?
Yeah. And I think, Drew's got this incredibly A&R style approach to working with artists, not in the sense of like I only want to work with the big artist. It's about constantly knowing what point in the cycle an artist is and at what point you become helpful.
Yes.
I feel like Drew has this like computer in the back of his head where he's mapped what everyone is doing musically in Athens.
He's tapped in.
And as soon as that information is pertinent, it matches with another thing, he's the connector. He's the connective tissue.
Interesting.
And so I want to be that. We want to be kind of the lightning rod for someone who's ready to seize the opportunity to put the music out. They might not have all the funds in place to do it. They might be a little gun shy of doing it.
Yeah.
And we can hold that hand through that process. And obviously that could be a huge artist, or it could be someone
on their first single.
Yeah.
Because it's like, all right, maybe it's like Drew, somebody like Drew would know, like, all right, it's their first release. Like they're definitely not ready for vinyl. But it's like when you're on EP2 or album 1, it's like, all right, they're ready. Like they've been touring, And I think that kind of awareness is pretty big to what you guys are doing. But that's awesome, man. Okay, I'm trying to think of where I want to go with that. That's so interesting that you've kind of got your place. I noticed there was like a ton of options, like color-wise and size-wise. So when did you guys start doing all that? There's probably like 50 colors, isn't there?
Yeah,
that's crazy.
There's all of the colorways, but then there is all of the kind of customizations. Like you can add one color on top of another one, and so there's like an endless amount of configurations.
It seems like 7 years ago every record was black, and then like some of the big dogs started doing like the multicolored ones, and now it's like everybody's got to have like a red
prerequisite
one. Interesting.
And so, but the hardest thing with that is, okay, well, how do we help artists understand the options? So a great example of a tool that we built lately is just a project visualizer, is what we called it.
I saw that. Really cool.
And it's like, if you're going to sell something, you have to be able to tell your audience what it looks like.
Yes.
And not everyone is a Photoshop whiz.
Of course.
And also, like, you wouldn't necessarily trust your graphic designer to tell you what your vinyl record is going to look like.
Of course not.
So what we're trying to do is to create that kind of generative mock-up system for people that are ready to order.
Yeah.
So that as soon as they're bringing that order in, they have the graphic assets they need to put it out to their audience and to
see it, get excited about it, and like, like pre-order, because they don't have to pay up front for pre-order, right? Like they pay when they pick up, right?
Yeah.
Interesting. All right. And I feel like a lot of it's been years since I've quoted vinyl. I've talked to Drew about it recently, and I was impressed with what you guys had. But I remember probably a couple years ago, like every single vinyl place, it felt like you go to their website and it'd be like email for quote, or like, it's like you couldn't even get a ballpark number. I was like, I just want to know how much 100 vinyls is, it's like couldn't even find out now.
It was a weird kind of gatekeepery thing, and there's still a little bit of that goes on today, but I think
with you guys quote it straight on the website, right? That's great.
Exactly.
Yeah, it's huge.
Every other industry has been mobilized in this way, and I think that vinyl, obviously it's an anachronistic technology, and it's one that I think everyone had given up on, and then it kind of crept back into our kind of psyche. And so there's a lot of people that have been working in it for a very long time that haven't necessarily moved along with the times of what expectations we have as a customer.
Yeah.
And so, like, it wasn't that long ago that people were still putting their fax number on a website to receive an order.
Because it is kind of like a nichier thing where it's like the only reason you would ever get vinyl made, I mean, I guess, 90s, is like if you were on a major label and you were murdering, right? Like you didn't just get a vinyl made if you were touring around, right?
No, exactly. And it's partly down to the stakes. The minimums when I first got into record pressing were 300. That's a lot of units.
That's a lot,
shift.
yeah. For young bands,
even as like a successful label project, we were usually scraping by with a minimum of 500 sales, but that was really busting a gut to do that.
I believe it, man. That's a ton of units at $25 each or whatever it is. That's great. Interesting. Okay. So you guys that's awesome, dude. I'm excited about it. It's really cool. I talked to Drew already because we're like 7 songs through our album at Chase Park, and I'm like, dude, like our album's not done, but when it is, I've got you. I'm gonna give you a call. And he's like, dude, let me know. You guys have crushed the pre-sale kind of stuff. And he ran me through how you guys do it. That was probably like 3 months ago, and it was exciting to hear.
That's killer.
So good for y'all, man. That's awesome. Well, dude, I've really enjoyed this. Let's get into the closing notes. It's been hour 7. Look at us go. That's pretty good. Dude, I've enjoyed this, man.
This has been a blast.
Thank you, dude. Thanks for coming on. I'm trying to think of how I want to end it because you kind of ran me through. Was there anything that you wanted to say about the business that you kind of want people to know? And I feel like this is a good opportunity for you. I want to talk to you about this later, too, and Drew as well, because I feel like a lot of the people that listen to the show, I mean, honestly, probably like 40-50% of people listen to the show are people in bands and like people like directly interested in music industry shit, and that's kind of rare for a show. Like you're really not listening unless you're a fan of the band that's on, or a fan of the creator or whatever. And we get a ton of listeners, which is awesome. So like I feel like there's some way that like what you guys do could be promoted through this, because of the listener base is so band oriented. Every band wants to be on. Every band listens to what other bands are doing. They want to hear how they're touring and stuff. So kind of what would you want to tell people in bands that are listening about what you guys do that you haven't already said, or even if you have, like, what would you want to say? I know that was a long-winded question. But
no, I think what I would encourage, if you're a regional, local act, or even if you're not and you just happen to be touring through Atlanta, is like, look us up. Like we love having guests. We love people visiting so that we can share the process. I mean, what I sincerely believe when I look at industries like the microbrewing industry, there's always going to be a Budweiser and a Coors and some kind of huge market incumbent. But if you're doing something locally and engaging your community and showing, how it's made, there's power and magnetism to that. And so, we really want to encourage people to come by and to participate. We're not quite ready for like public open where people can just come by anytime. But as long as someone lets us know and you don't mind.
You can come by the factory.
Yeah.
I mean, that was probably the first thing Drew said when you guys opened. He's like, dude, you got to come look at the factory. I was like, dude, I would love to. I just haven't been over there yet. And it's kind of the same kind of thing. I would call this like you're not trying to be the Budweiser of vinyl. Like you're very
trying to be the Willy Wonka.
You're very happy and understanding where kind of like, I'd call it like local content or something. Like if you guys I'm sure you guys are going to figure it out. And it seems like you already are, because like Pink Stones, the new Fiction records you guys write, all the Hefner stuff, or at least the last couple, right? And who else am I missing? There's a bunch. Annie Lee. Who else have you guys done?
That was first on-demand project.
Okay. Wim Tapley.
Wim Tapley was great to work with.
Yeah, great kid.
I mean, it's got to that point where I'm struggling to track. I used to like know the order of every customer that we had. Okay, we've got a lot.
Now.
And I think Drew coming in too as well, like him taking that side of the business on, so I can try and form the whole a little bit. But I mean, to go back to your question, come see us, or failing that, schedule a call with us. I don't think you'll find anyone more enthused about what you're trying to do.
I believe that.
Like we're stoked every time someone picks up the phone.
Good, man. Hell yeah, dude. Well, good for y'all, man. I'm really excited about it. I think it's really cool. This has been fascinating, by the way. If you ever want to come back on the show, you're more than welcome. Whenever you guys have, usually I like to do them like every 6-8 months. Bring Drew, and it was Brandon, right? Bring Drew and Brandon next time. That would be fun. All three of you guys. I would love, because Drew's been on the show probably like 4 times. I love having Drew on because he's a great guy and like a conduit, like you said. Like we could talk all day about music.
It'll keep me accountable. I think coming back on when we've got this record store network up, we can talk about that.
Please do it. Whenever you're ready, hit me up, because I'm fascinated in everything you're saying. All the business stuff, I'm super into that stuff. All of the growth stuff and the mindset kind of stuff is awesome.
Yeah.
Well, dude, thank you so much for coming on, man. It's been a pleasure. Let's give him a wave for the thumbnail. Give the camera a wave. I'm going to clip this up. Smile. Nice. All right. Thank y'all for listening so much. This has been Jameson on the Rocks, episode 120, I believe. We have merch in the bio if you want to support the show. That's the only kind of income we have. We'd really appreciate it. Go check out Echo Base. Do you guys have merch yet?
You know what? If you come by, we do. But it's
Ooh,
not
interesting. Interesting.
Yeah.
Not yet. That's cool.
Yeah, you'll get some swag if you come
I
by.
love it. Okay, sweet. All right. Well, y'all go check out Ecobase. If you're a band, definitely hit them up about getting your record made. If you've made it this far, I believe you're probably sold on it. Yeah. Well, thanks so much, bro. I really appreciate it, man. All right. Have a good one, y'all. Bye.
Yeah.